choose to deny the truth that the things in me, and all I see is what I'm wanting to be. I was the center of my universe until I found that I was never the one. I found that I was never the one. Sometimes the blind lead the blind. The truth is not hard to find. See the signs, draw the line, yet still you'll be undermined. I was one of a kind until the sun left me blind, and now I finally find that I was never the one. Never the one. Never the one. Never the one. They keep me awake, the dreams are too much to take. What's at stake, what is fake, trying so hard not to break. Do you feel the world shake from the decisions we make? The smoke had faded away, and I was never the one. Never the one. Never the one. Never the one. I find that I was never the one.
Well, hello there. Continuing on with the Wheel of Time New Spring. Once again, on the good microphone where you can hear everything. And, yeah, so we are up to Chapter 7. I have recently uploaded the videos to my YouTube, which should be linked somewhere. Can't really think of where right now, though. Anyway, Chapters 1 and 2, we met Lan Mandagaran, and he was about to fight some Aiels, and they ran off after kind of, I don't know, waving at him or saluting him or something. Anyway, they ran off, and then we left him scratching his head, and then we met Suan and Moraine, and they heard a prophecy that they weren't supposed to necessarily hear, and that was, and some lady who gave the prophecy, unfortunately passed away. She was old though, like 300-400 years old, something like that. Anyway, more grey hairs than I've got. Then in chapters 3 and 4, it was all Moraine and Suan I can't remember exactly what they did, but they were hanging around and doing stuff inside the tower, and going out to some camp to take down some names of kids that could potentially be the prophesied dragon reborn. And then in 5 and 6, Moraine finds out that her uncle, who was the king of Kyrene, passed on. And so she and Suan got let free from going out into the cold and got to sit inside transcribing people's chicken scratch into legible words. So they still get to maybe find out who could possibly be the prophesied dragon reborn. Bear with me one moment, please. Alright, so with that done, it's time to get on to it. Chapter 7. The Itch. I really need to do something about this camera. Maybe I can give a better perspective like that. There we go. Right. Now add a little bit more. 1, 2, 2. Yes, yes. All right. There we go. That should be filling up your ear holes right now with my vocals. The following day brought still more names that met the criteria, and in larger number, all with vague reference to Dragonmount for the place of birth. Moraine realized she and Suan would never see a name with "born on the slopes of Dragonmount" attached. The prophecies of the dragon were known to many people, though often known wrongly, especially among the common folk. But the mountain's connection remained in even the most nonsensical versions. No woman would want to admit that she had birthed a son who would channel power one day, with all that entailed, the child of her body doomed to madness and terror. How much less would she admit to bearing a child who might become the dragon reborn? She could not deny Dragonmount entirely, or her acquaintances might call her on it, yet near the mountain or in sight of it, were safe enough. The child they sought would surely be hidden behind such half-truth. Sorry, need to stand. It's one of those days. Someone would need to visit each of those women with closer questions, prudently phrased and carefully asked. She rehearsed those questions in her mind, the delicate probing... Why am I clipping now? Turn that back down. There we go. No, still kind of... She rehearsed those questions in her mind, the delicate probing to elicit information while giving away nothing, roused the mother's suspicions, and she would lie again, and likely run as soon as the questioner's back was turned. It would be playing Deus de Mar, with the world at stake. Deus de Mar, if you remember correctly, was the game of houses where everybody is trying to one-up each other and gain more power. Far from a task she would relish, yet how to resist imagining? The morning also brought a visit from Tamra, who abruptly walked in just as Moiraine was slipping her little book, bearing a fresh name, back into a belt pouch. She tried to disguise the movement, make it part of her curtsy, a touch of clumsiness brought on by surprise. She thought it was well done, yet she held her breath as the Amelin studied her. Had the other woman seen the book? Suddenly, the notion of asking forgiveness rather than permission seemed very frail. Discovery would gain them neither. In all likelihood, discovery would bring rustication. Working on an isolated farm from sunrise to sunset, cut off from friends and studies, forbidden to channel. For novices and accepted, that was the penultimate penalty. One last chance to learn correct behaviour before being sent away forever. Far worse than blistered hands, though. It would certainly separate them forever from the hunt for the child. I'd have thought yesterday you would have sated your appetites for boredom, Tamra said finally, and Moiraine breathed again. Especially yours, Suan. Suan seldom blushed, but her face coloured at that. Everyone knew her dislike of clerical work. Copying lines was punishment she dreaded most. Moiraine put in, "The list helps me govern my thoughts, Mother." Once you began giving misleading answers, they came more and more easily, even to the Amelin seat. In truth, those thoughts still flashed into her head when least expected, lists or no lists. Thoughts of a babe in the snow and a faceless man, equally dire, of the Sun Throne. She wanted to beg Tamra to halt that scheme, yet she knew begging would be useless. The tower was no less implacable in its weaving than the wheel of time itself. In both cases, the threads were human lives, and the pattern they made more important than any individual thread. "Very well, child, so long as your studies don't suffer." Tamra held out a folded paper that Moiraine had not noticed, sealed and with a circle of green wax. "Take this to Karine Nagashi. She should be in her rooms. Give it to no one else." As if she would do that. Some accepted complained, very quietly and very privately, over having to climb the wide corridors that spiraled upwards through the tower, but even with a climb halfway to the top, Moiraine enjoyed any errand that took her to see the Arger quarters. A great deal could be learned through seeing people where they lived. Even Aes Sedai let their guard down in those circumstances. They did a little, at any rate, enough for one who knew how to listen and observe. Sorry, brain not burring at the moment. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a little musical interlude while I make some coffee and get brain burring again. All right, that's enough of that. I have my coffee, as you can see. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, the Audio-Technica AT2020 is not exactly an expensive one, but it's also not a particularly cheap one. Kind of need my entire sound setup just to make it work. I've heard of people trying to use it with just a Go XLR and basically failing because it didn't quite have enough proper voltage to put down the phantom voltage line which this thing needs. Being a full-on condenser mic. But, it's neither here nor there. For those who are wondering, that there is my secondary camera. Cute, huh? That is just a cheap Microsoft LifeCam 720p something or other. Oh, coffee. Nectar of the gods. All right, where were we? The Arger quarters were identical in number of rooms and how they were laid out, but the details differed widely. The impression of a full-size sword was worked into each of the huge white floor stones of the green Arger quarters. Swords in 24 different styles, single-edged and double, curved and straight. Every door along the hallways was carved with a sword pointed up, gilded for the rooms of the sitters, and silvered or lacquered for many others. The tapestries on the walls, between tall gilded stand lamps on bases worked in the form of stacked halberds, were of martial scenes, charging horsemen and battles and famous last stands, alternating with ancient battle standards from lands long dead, many torn and stained, and all preserved through the centuries by weaves of the One Power. No Aes Sedai had ridden to war since the Trolloc Wars. But when the last battle came, the battle Arger would... Oh, come on. It's stuck in my hair. Lovely. But when the last battle came, the battle Arger would ride in the forefront. Until then, they fought for justice, where it often could be obtained through only their warders' swords. But that was just what they did while they waited on Tarmangaidon, which is the last battle. Another difference here was the number of men. Not just men, of course, warders. Tall or short, wide or slim, even quite stout in one case. They moved like lions or leopards. None wore their distinctive cloak indoors, but the cloak was a mere decoration for a discerning eye. You could see warders in any Arger's quarters, except the Reds. But most kept rooms in the guards' barracks or even in the city. Green's wardens often lived in the same apartments as the sister. A green-eyed warder who made up for his lack of height through girth glanced at her as she strode by quickly, as if on an errand. 3 others standing together fell silent at her approach, their quiet conversation taken up again after she passed. One wore silver bells in his dark Araphelum braids, one had a thick Tarrabona moustache, and the third was very dark, perhaps a Tyran or Southern Altaran. Yet, aside from the grace of their movements, there was another thing they shared with each other, and with the heavy-set man, and with every man to be seen here. Once, while hawking with cousins, she had looked into the eyes of a caped eagle, with its ruff of black feathers around its head. Meeting a warder's gaze was akin to that. Not fierce, but full of self-knowledge. Hello, Billy. How are you? Absolutely aware of their own capabilities, their capacity for violence. And yet, it was violence in restraint, disciplined by their own wills and their bonds to their Aes Sedai. Here, they were simply going about their daily lives. A lean man, his head shaven except for... Thank you for the beaties. A lean man, his head shaven except for a Shinaran topknot, was resting against a wall with one booted foot up, tuning a fiddle and ignoring the good-natured jibing of another warder, who said that it sounded like a wet cat caught in a net. 2 others, in shirt sleeves, were practicing with wooden swords in a broad side corridor, the bundled lathes clattering with each swift blow. Rena Hafton, who somehow made a square face lovely and a stocky build both elegant and graceful, was urging them on with a wide smile, calling, "Well struck, Waylon. Oh, very well struck, Elias." For size, they might have been twins, though one was dark and clean-shaven, the other fair with a short beard. Grinning, they moved faster and faster. Their sweat-sodden shirts clung to broad shoulders and backs, yet the pair seemed fresh and untired. Through an open door, Moraine saw a round-faced warder playing a stately melody on a flute, while a grey-haired Jala Bandavin, an imposing woman, despite standing near a hand shorter than Moraine, attempted to teach a new warder the steps of a court dance. He had to be new, a blushing, pale-haired boy of no more than 20. Yet no man gained the bond unless he had already passed all the requisite skills, all save dancing at least. Kareen's door, bearing a sword lacquered in red, gold and black, also stood open, with sounds of merry music coming out. Moraine had no idea what the lacquering meant, or the colours, and she suspected she never would unless she chose the green. That would not be, yet she disliked not knowing. Once she identified something she did not know, the ignorance became an itch in her shoulder blade, just beyond reach. Not for the first time, she filed the swords into the back of her mind. Beside many other things seen in Arger quarters, the itch receded, yet she knew it would return when next she saw those doors. The few tapestries in Kareen's sitting room were scenes of war or hunting, but most of the wall space was given over to bookshelves carved in the styles of 6 countries. Along with a few books, they held a large lion's skull, and even bigger from a bear, glazed bowls, vases in odd shapes, daggers adorned with gems and gold, and daggers with plain wooden hilts, one with just the nub of a broken blade. A blacksmith's hammer with the head split in 2 lay next to a cracked wooden bowl that held a single fat fire drop, fine enough to grace a crown. A gilded barrel clock with hands frozen at just before noon or midnight stood beside a steel-backed gauntlet stained black with steel-backed gauntlet stained black with what Moraine was sure was blood. They and all the rest were mementos of well over 100 years wearing the shawl. Of memories before the shawl there were few. Just a row of painted miniatures on the wave-carved mantel over the fireplace, showing a plainly dressed, dignified man, a plump, smiling woman, and 5 children, 3 of them girls. They were Corinne's family, long since passed into the grave along with her nieces and nephews, and their children, and their children's children, and more. That was the pain borne by Aes Sedai. Families died, and everything you knew vanished, except the tower. The White Tower always remained. Massive Kali, whose hair and Karil? We'll go Karil, whose hair and beard gave him the aspect of a golden-maned lion, was reading a book in front of the fireplace, with his boots resting on the ornate brass fender, a feather of blue smoke rising from the bowl of his long-stemmed pipe. Strepen, looking more like a clerk than a warder, with his narrow shoulders and sad brown eyes, sat on a stool playing a lively jig on a 12-string bittern, fingers flashing as skillfully as any hired musician's. Neither man stopped what he was doing for the arrival of an accepted. Corrine herself stood working at an embroidery frame mounted on a stand. It always seemed incongruous to see a green doing needlework, especially when, as now, the subject was a field of wildflowers. And how did that accord with the violence and death decorating her walls? A tall, slim woman, Corrine looked exactly at what she was. Her ageless face strong and beautiful, her nearly black eyes pools of serenity. Even here she wore a riding dress, the divided skirts splashed with emerald green, and her dark hair, lightly touched with white, was cut shorter than either Carly's or Stepan's, above her shoulders, and gathered in a thick braid. No doubt it was easier to care for while travelling, cut like that. Corrine seldom remained in the tower for long before setting out again. She placed her needle on the embroidery frame, took the letter, broke the green sealing wax with a thumb. Tamra always sealed her messages to sisters with the wax in the Arger colour of the recipient, of all Argers, and none. Whatever Tamra had written was quickly read, and no change came to Corrine's face. But before the green had finished, Stepan leaned his bittern against the side table and began buttoning up his coat. Carly placed his book on a shelf, tapped the dottle from his pipe into the hearth, and stuffed the pipe into a capacious coat pocket. That was all. But they were plainly waiting and ready. Despite his sad eyes, Stepan did not look a clerk any longer. They were both leopards, awaiting the command to hunt. "Will there be a reply, Aes Sedai?" Moraine asked. "I'll carry it myself, child," Corrine replied, starting for the door with a brisk stride that made her silk skirts rasp softly. "Tamra wants me urgently," she told the 2 warders, who were heeling her like hunting hounds, "but she doesn't say why." Moraine allowed herself a brief smile. As with servants, sisters often forgot accepted had ears. Sometimes the best way to learn was to keep silent and listen. As she was making her way back down the long drafty, spiraling corridor, thinking about what she had learned and trying to ignore the cold, Suan came running up behind her. There were no sisters to be seen, but still. Another message, Suan explained. To Aisha Ravenos. She kept muttering about something about urgent, making it a question. I wager it was the same as you carried to Kareen. What do you suppose Tamra wants with the grey and a green together? The grey handled matters of mediation and justice, where it came to laws rather than swords, and Aisha was reputed to adhere to the strictest letter of the law, no matter her own feelings, whether pity or contempt, a trait she shared with Kareen. And both women had worn the shawl for a very long time, though that could be unimportant. Moraine might not be so handy with puzzles as Suan, but this truly was like the game of houses. She looked around carefully, including a glance over her shoulder. A maid was trimming the wicks on a stand lamp farther along the hallway, and two liveried men, one atop a tall ladder, were doing something concerning one of the wall hangings. There was still not a sister in sight, but she lowered her voice anyway. Tamra wants searchers to look for the boy-child. Oh, this changes everything. I was wrong, Suan, and you were right. The only problem with this mic is that it is rather sensitive, so you would have heard some truck reversing outside just then. Anywho. Right and wrong about what? What makes you think she's recruiting these searchers? How could the woman be so deft with puzzles and not see the pattern here? What matter could be more urgent to Tamra right now than the boy-child, Suan? She said patiently. Or more secret, so she dares not put the reason on paper. That secrecy means that she believes the Reds cannot be trusted. That is what you were right about. More than that, how many other sisters will at first want to deny that this child really is the one prophesied? Particularly if he evades discovery until he is a grown man and already channeling. No, she means to use the sisters she is sure of to search for him. Where I was wrong is that thinking he would be brought to the tower, that would only expose him to the Reds and others who might be untrustworthy. Once found, Tamra will send him into hiding. His education will be at the hands of her searchers, the woman she trusts most. Suan clapped a hand atop her head. I think my skull will explode, she muttered. You built all of that from 2 messages, and you don't even know what they said? I know one thing they said, and one they did not. It is simply a matter of seeing the patterns and fitting the pieces together. Suan, really, you should be able to do it easily. Oh, Elid gave me a blacksmith puzzle last week. Said she was bored with it, but I think she couldn't solve it. Want to try your hand? No, thank you, Moraine said politely, and after a quick look for lurking sisters, stuck her tongue out at the other woman. The next day, Tamra sent 3 more messages. The first went to Mylin Argania, the second to Valeri Gorovny. Yep. A plump little brown who always wore a smile and seemed to be bustling even when standing still. And the third to Ludice Danine, a bony yellow whose long grim face was framed by brightly beaded Terrabona braids that hung to her waist. None of them let slip a hint of the message's content, yet all 3 had worn the shawl well over 100 years, and all 3 shared that reputation for strict adherence to the law. Moraine saw it as confirmation. Even Suan began to believe. 5 seemed too few to undertake the search for the boy-child. Day by day, the names entered into their small notebooks filled more and more pages, yet Tamra sent no further messages, at least not by them. Alidra Najaf was raised keeper of the chronicles to replace Gitara, and she might have carried them, or more likely sent them by a novice. For a time, Moraine and Suan tried keeping an unobtrusive watch on the Amelin study and her apartments, taking turns to peek around the edge of the doorway, but Tamra had a steady flow of visitors. Not constant, but steady. Sitters could be dismissed from consideration, since sitters rarely left the confines of the city while they held a chair in the hall of the tower. Yet any of the others could have been searchers, or not. It was extremely frustrating for Moraine. That itch on the shoulder blade, just where her fingers could not reach. Soon enough they gave up attempts to spy. For one thing, there seemed no point. For another, with only one copying, recording the names went much too slowly, and Alidra, returning to the Amelin study, caught Moraine lurking in the doorway. White hair was the sole similarity between Alidra and Gitara. Alidra was straight and cut as short as Kerine's. The new keeper was lean, her coppery skin turned to leather from long exposure to the sun and wind. Yet assuredly, no one had ever called her a beauty. With her narrow jaw and sharp nose. For jewellery, she wore the great serpent ring alone. Her dress was of blue wool, finely woven but simply cut, and the deep blue stole on her shoulders was no more than 2 fingers wide. Very different woman from Gitara. "What are you looking at, child?" she asked gently. Maybe I didn't ask it so gently. "Just the sisters going in and out of the Amelin study, Aes Sedai," Moraine replied, every word true. Alidra smiled. "Dreaming of the shawl? Perhaps your time would be better spent in study and practice." "We find time for both," Aes Sedai, "and this work occupies my mind otherwise." Also true. The search for the boy-child occupied every scrap of her mind not given to thoughts she would rather not have. A faint frown creasing her forehead, Alidra laid a hand on Moraine's cheek, almost as if checking for a fever. "Do those other dreams still trouble you? Some of the Browns know a great deal about herbs. I'm sure one will give you something to help you sleep if you need it." Varen Sedai already has. The concoction had a foul taste, but it did help her sleep. A pity it did not help her forget the nightmares that came when she did. The dreams are not so bad now. Sometimes there was no way to use evasion. "Good then," Alidra's smile returned. But she shook a mildly reproving finger under Moraine's nose. Nevertheless, daydreaming in doorways is not proper for one of the accepted, child. If I see it again, I will have to take notice. You understand me?" "Yes," said I. There would be no more spying. Moraine began to think she would scream from that cursed itch. Chapter 8 is next, and I just need a very quick water break because nobody is redeeming things for me. How rude of you. Chapter 8, Shreds of Serenity. There was no evading their private lessons with the sisters either. Not that Moraine wanted to, or Suan either. But long hours sitting and writing left them surprisingly tired, and also left only the evenings free after supper. The accepted, who still rode out every day at sunrise, did the same, though many grumbled at it, when there were no Aes Sedai around to overhear, at least. At least they took their lessons when lessons were offered. Some sisters refused, saying they would teach accepted again when they no longer had to give novice classes that should have been taught by accepted. All too many Aes Sedai disliked the situation. Gossip said that petitions had been presented to the Amyrlin requesting a return to normal routines. But if so, Tamra rejected them. The sisters' faces remained masks of serenity, yet frequently the eyes of even the mildest flashed with a fire that made novices squeak and accepted step very gingerly. In the depths of winter's cold, the tower seemed feverish. Siuan never spoke of her own experiences, but Moraine quickly realized that she herself attracted particularly heated looks from nearly every Aes Sedai she encountered, and she understood why. Unlike the rest, she and Siuan could have given novice classes and taken their own lessons at a more reasonable hour. A few sisters who taught others at night pronounced themselves busy when either of them tried to schedule a lesson. In some ways, Aes Sedai could be as petty as anybody else, though that was something no accepted dead say aloud. Moraine hoped these small enmities would fade soon. Paltry irritations sometimes had a way of festering into lifelong antagonisms. What could she do, though? Apologize humbly to those who seemed most angry, begging their indulgence and hope. She would not give up the lists. Not all sisters were so reluctant. Karine met with her to discuss the relatively few facts known to historians of Arthur Hawkwing's empire. Mylene tested her on the ancient writer William of Meneches and his influence on the Chaldean philosopher Shivena Khenzi, and Aisha questioned her closely on the differences in the structure of law in Shinar and Amadesia. That was the sort of lesson she took now. What they could teach her of the power, what she could learn of it, not always the same, had been imparted months past. Had she dared, she would have asked why they were still in the tower. Why were they not out hunting down the names on the list? Why? And yet she knew the answer. What had to be the answer? Nothing else fit. But they felt no urgency. Taking the boy from his mother straight away would be cruel. Maybe they thought they had years to find him. But if that were the case, they had not even seen the list yet. With so many entries lacking as much as a home village, maybe they were waiting for its completion. She hoped there were other searches, because Siuan reported Valera and Ludice were still in the tower. No urgency. Moraine burned with it. Rumour said the fighting continued many leagues southeast, but only in skirmishes, though some were said to be fierce. Apparently no one among the commanders of the coalition army wanted to press too hard on dangerous foes who were, after all, in retreat. That last was certain, at least, reported by Aes Sedai. Rumour said many of the Merendians and Altarans had already packed up and headed south for home, and the Amadisians and Geheldian planned on following soon. Rumour added that word had come from troubles along the Blight, and the Borderlanders would soon be ride north. Aes Sedai, it seemed, paid no heed to rumours. She tried bringing the tales up with them, but rumour is irrational and has no place here, child, Mylene told her firmly, her gaze serene above the teacup balanced on her fingertips. Now, when Shivena said that reality is illusion, where did she gain insight from Willem, and what was her own? If you want to talk rumours, make them rumours of Hawkwing, Karine said, voice sharp. She always toyed with one of her knives while teaching, using it for a pointer. Tonight it was a poor man's belt knife, so old the wooden handle was cracked and warped. The light knows half of what we have of him is rumour. Aisha sighed and pointed a stout finger. her soft brown eyes suddenly quite hard, a plain-faced woman who could have passed for a farmer's wife. She wore a wealth of jewellery, earrings with large fire drops, long necklaces of both emeralds and rubies, but only the great serpent for a finger ring. If you cannot keep your mind on the matter at hand, perhaps a visit to Marine is in order. Yes, I thought you'd say that. No making them see the urgency was possible, was just impossible. All she could do was wait, and practice not grinding her teeth. Let her test soon. With the shawl on her shoulders, she would be out of the tower and searching for the boy like an arrow leaving the bow. Soon, but not before she had all of the names. Oh, it was such a quandary. The accepted quarters seethed with rumours more than usual, though not about who had a spat with whom, or which green was said to be behaving scandalously with a warder. These tales were gotten from guardsmen, from soldiers, from men and women in the camps, about the fighting, about men who had died heroically, and those who had been heroes and still lived. Those were particularly talked over. Such a one might have the qualities of a warder, a subject of much discussed by accepted, save for the few who already knew they wanted the red. There were tales of camps breaking, though no one knew whether they were moving east after the army or returning home, and tales of small groups remaining behind to make sure that women's names were entered for the tower's bounty. At least that reduced the chances that the right woman would slip away unknown. But if she was already entered and already gone, would she be among those who would be easily found? Moraine could have screamed from frustration. Elid Abarim had a story. Elid Abarim had a story from an Aes Sedai, though she insisted it was no rumour. I heard Aladorna tell Shemaine, Elid said with a smile. Elid always smiled when she saw herself in a mirror, and when she smiled, she always seemed to be looking into one. God, I know people like that. A gusting evening breeze in the well ripped through the waves of golden hair framing her perfect face. Her eyes were like large sapphires, her skin like rich cream. The only fault in her appearance that Moraine could see was an overabundance of bosom. And she was very tall, nearly as tall as most men. Men smiled at Elid when they did not leer. Novices mooned after her, and too many fools among the accepted envied her. Aladorna said Gitara had a foretelling that Tam and Gaiden will come during the lifetimes of sisters now breathing. I can't wait. I intend to choose green, you know. Every accepted knew that. I mean to have 6 warders when I ride into the last battle. Every accepted knew that too. Elid was always telling you what she intended to do. She almost always did it too. That hardly seemed fair. So, Moraine said softly, when Elid had joined the others streaming off to supper, Gitara did have other foretellings. At least one, and if one, then perhaps more. Suan frowned. We already knew the last battle is coming. She fell silent while Katarine and Serene passed, talking wearily of whether they were too tired to eat, then went on once they were beyond earshot. What does it matter if Gitara had 12 foretellings, or 100? Suan, did you never wonder how Tamara could be certain this is the time, that the boy will be born now? I would say it's very likely that at least one of these other foretellings spoke of him, something that, put with what we heard her say, told Tamara now was the time. It was Moraine's turn to frown, in thought. fine. While you're beeping at me, desk is going down. Hey, look at me. I'm the Dragon Reborn. Blowing smoke. It works, right? It was Moraine's turn to frown, in thought. Do you know how the foretelling was with Guittara? It took different women in different ways, including how they gave voice to a foretelling. The way she spoke, he could have been being born at that instant. Maybe the shock of that was what killed her. The wheel weaves as the wheel wheels, Suan said glumly, and then gave herself a shake. Light, let's go eat. You still need to practice. They had resumed the practicing too, at least at night. And Myrelle had continued to help. When she was not so tired that she went straight to her bed after supper. Or sometimes before. Wow. Filters, add. Enough of the accepted. Ooh, yes, there we go. Yeah, definitely need a compressor on this sucker. Enough of the accepted had did one or the other that the galleries were still and silent long before the lamps were extinguished. The practice went poorly for Moraine, especially in the beginning. The very first night, Elida entered her room while she was suffering Suan and Myrelle's torments on her flowered rug. The fire had been built as high as the small hearth would accept, but the best that could be said was that the blaze took the edge off the chill. At least it was not freezing. I'm glad to see you're not taking your excuse of your work to avoid practice, the Red Sister said. Her tone said she was surprised to see it, and contempt wrapped in the word work. Once again her dress was pure red, and she wore her fringed shawl as though on appointed duties. Moving to a corner facing Moraine, she folded her arms beneath her breast. Continue, I wish to observe. There was nothing for it but to obey. Perhaps spurred by Elida's presence, Suan and Myrelle did their very best, which meant the very worst for startling slaps and pinches, sudden bangs beside Moraine's ear, and switch-like blows across her legs, always just when she needed her concentration most. She tried not to look at Elida, but the sister stood where she could not avoid seeing her. Elida's judgmental gaze made her nervous, yet maybe it inspired her as well, or drove her, focusing herself. Concentrating with all she had, she managed to complete 61 weaves before the 62nd collapsed in a tangle of earth, air, and water and spirit that left her skin clammy until she let it dissipate. Not a wonderful performance, but neither was it so terrible. She had come close to completing all 100 on numerous occasions, but she had actually done it only twice, once by the skin of her teeth. Pitiful, Elida said, cold as ice. You'll never pass like that, and I want you to pass, child. You will pass, or I will make you take off your skin and dance in your bones before you're sent away. You two are pitiful friends, if that's how you help her. We knew how to practice when I was accepted." Directing Suan and Myrelle to the corner where she had been standing, she took their place at the table. "This will show you how it's done properly. Again, child." Wetting her lips, Moraine turned her back. Myrelle gave her an encouraging smile, and Suan nodded confidently, but she could see their worry. "What would Elida do?" she began. As soon as she embraced the power, flashes of light began streaking across her line of vision, leaving black and silver flecks dancing in her eyes. Bangs and piercing whistles made her ears ring. Blows from hard-swung straps or switches struck her one after another. It was all continuous, with no let-up until she had completed a weave, and then only a short pause while she began to weave again. And all the while, Elida harangued her in a cold, matter-of-fact tone. "Faster, child! You will weave faster! The weave must almost leap into being complete! Faster! Faster!" Clutching at serenity with her fingernails, Moraine reached only the 12th weave before her concentration broke completely. The weave not only collapsed, she lost Sidar entirely. Blinking, she tried to clear the dancing flecks from her sight, and more successfully to blink back tears. Pain covered her from shoulders to ankles, bruises aching, welts throbbing, stinging from sweat. A constant chime was sounding in her ears. "Thank you, Aes Sedai," Suan said quickly. "We see what we must do now." Myrelle's hands were clutching her skirts in fists, and her face was ashen, her eyes wide with horror. Because I'm nice, I am pausing for ad break. Oh. "Again," Elida said. It took everything Moraine had in her to make herself turn her back once more. The only difference was that she finished just 9 weaves this time. "Again," Elida said. On the 3rd try, she completed 6 weaves and only 3 on the 4th. Sweat rolled down her face. After a while, the flashing lights and ear-piercing whistles hardly seemed more than annoyances. Only the incessant beating mattered. Only the endless beating and the endless pain. On the 5th attempt, she fell to her knees, weeping beneath the first shower of blows. The pummeling ceased instantly, but huddling in on herself, she sobbed as though she would never stop. Oh, Light, she had never been hurt like this before. Never. She was not even aware of Suan kneeling beside her until the other woman said gently, "Can you stand, Moraine?" Raising her head from the rug, she stared up at Suan's face, full of concern. With an effort she had not thought in her, she managed to master her weeping, barely, then nodded and began to push herself up laboriously. Bruised muscles did not want to lift her. Every movement scrubbed her shift against her sweat-stung welts, clothing her in burning agony. "She will live," Elida said dryly. "A little pain tonight will drive the lesson home. You must be fast. I will come back in the morning to heal her. And you too, Suan, help her in the bed and begin." Suan's face paled, and when the Aes Sedai commanded. Moraine did not want to watch, yet Suan had been forced to, so she held her eyes open, only by force of will. It made her want to begin weeping all over again. Often when they practiced, Suan managed to complete every last weave, despite anything Moraine could do. She never failed less than 2/3 of the way through. Tonight, under Elida's strict tutelage, she managed 20 the first time. The second it was 17, and 14 on the third. Her face was drained of colour and slick with sweat. Her breath came raggedly, but she had not shed a tear, and when a weave failed, she started from the beginning again without so much as a moment's pause. On the fourth try, she finished 12, and 12 on the fifth. The sixth, and 12 on the fifth, and the sixth. Doggedly, she began to weave once more. "That's enough for tonight," Elida said. Not one drop of pity touched her voice. Slowly, painfully, to Suan turned, the light of Sidar vanishing. Her face was absolutely devoid of expression. Elida went on calmly, adjusting the shawl on her shoulders. "Even if you managed to finish as you are, you would still fail. There isn't a shed of serenity in you." She fixed first Suan, then Moraine with a stern eye. "Remember, you must be serene whatever is done to you, and you must be fast. If you are slow, you will fail as surely as if you fall to panic or fear. Tomorrow night we will see if you can do better." Suan waited until the door closed behind the Aes Sedai and threw back her head. "Oh, light!" she wailed, falling to her knees with a thud, and the tears she had held back came in torrents. Moraine bounded from the bed. Well, she tried to bound. It was actually more of a pained hobble. Then Myrelle reached Suan first. The three of them knelt there, holding one another and weeping. Myrelle as hard as she or Suan. Finally, Myrelle pushed back, sniffing and wiping tears from her cheeks with her fingers. "Wait here," she said, as if they were in condition to go anywhere, and darted from the room. Soon she had returned with a red-glazed jar the size of her two fists, and also Sheriam and Elid to help get Suan and Moraine undressed and apply the ointment in the jar. "This is wrong," Elid said fiercely, once the pair of them were naked and she were opening the jar, all gasping over their welts and bruises, finished. Sheriam and Myrelle nodded quick agreement. "The law forbids using the power to discipline an initiate." "Oh," Suan growled. "And how often have you had your ears flicked with the power by a sister, or gotten a stripe across your bottom?" A gasp broke from her mouth. "There's no need to rub that clear to the bone, is there?" "I'm sorry," Elid said in contrite tones. "I'll try to be easier. Vanity was a powerful fault, but that was her only real fault. Her only one. It was very hard to like Elid. You two should report this. We could go to Moraine." "No," Moraine breathed hoarsely. "Go on. The salve stung worse than the welts. It was better after. A little better. I think Elida is really trying to help us. She said she wants us to pass." Suan stared at her as though she had sprouted feathers. "I don't recall hearing her say that. Myself, I think she's trying to make us fail." "Besides," Moraine added, "whoever heard—" Oh, Sheriam muttered an apology, but the ointment still stung. "Whoever heard of an accepted complaining without paying for it?" That brought three nods, grudgingly given, yet they nodded. Novices who complained received a gentle, if firm, explanation of why matters were how they were. Accepted were expected to know better. They were required to learn endurance every bit as much as history or the One Power. "Maybe she'll decide to leave you alone," Sheriam said, but she did not sound as if she believed it would happen. When they finally departed, Myrelle left the jar of ointment behind. Only Varen's vile-tasting concoction let them sleep. Huddled beneath the blankets in Moraine's narrow bed, and it was the grim reminder of that jar sitting on the mantel that warred with sleep and as much as their welts and bruises. Elida was as good as her word, appearing before daybreak to use healing on them, and it was used, not offered. She merely cupped their heads between her hands and wove without asking. When the intricate weave of spirit air and water touched her, Moraine gasped and convulsed. For a minute it felt as though she were totally immersed in icy water, but when the weave vanished, her yellowing bruises were gone. Unfortunately, Elida supplied a new crop that night, and another on the following. Moraine lasted through 7 attempts, and then 10 before pain and tears overwhelmed her. Suan made 10 the second night, and 12 on the third. And Suan never wept until Elida was gone. Not one tear. Sheriam, Myrel, and Elid must have kept watch, for each night after Elida left, they appeared to offer commiseration while undressing Suan and her and spreading the salve on their injuries. Elid even tried telling jokes, but no one felt like laughing. Moraine began to wonder whether the jar held enough ointment to last. Had she misheard? Could Suan be right, that Elida wanted them to fail? A cold terror settled in her body, a leaden lump of ice. She was afraid that the next time she would beg Elida to stop, but Elida would not. She was certain of that, and it made her want to cry. On the morning after Elida's third visit, though, it was Marine who woke them in Suan's bed and offered healing. "She will not trouble you in this manner again," the motherly Aes Sedai said to them once the bruises were gone. "How did you find out?" Moraine asked, hurriedly pulling her shift over her head. With them sleeping like the dead under the influence of Verin's mixture, the fire had burned down to ashes in the night, and the air in the room was cold, if not quite so cold as it had been only days earlier. But the floor was a little warmer. She snatched up her stockings from where they had been left draped over a chair back. "I have my ways, as you should know," Marine replied mysteriously. Moraine suspected Myrel, or Sheriam, or Elid, if not all three, but Marine was Aes Sedai. Never a straight answer when a mystery would do, and perhaps do better. In any case, she very nearly earned herself an imposed penance, and I informed her that I'd asked the Amelin for mortification of the flesh, and I reminded her that what I must deal to sisters is harsher than what I give to novices or accepted. She was convinced. "Why shouldn't she get penance for what she did to us?" Suan asked, reaching behind herself to do up the buttons on her dress. The mistress of novices raised an eyebrow at a tone which came very close to demanding, but perhaps she believed they deserved a little leeway after Elida. "Had she used Saidar to punish or coerce you, I'd have seen her strapped to the triangle for birching. Yet what she did broke no law." Marine's eyes twinkled suddenly, and her lips curved in a small smile. "Perhaps I shouldn't tell you, but I will. Her penance would have been for helping you cheat in the test for the shawl. All that saved her was the question of whether it actually was cheating. I trust you will accept her gift in the spirit it was given. After all, she paid a price in humiliation for giving it when I confronted her." "Believe me," I said, I will," Suan said flatly. What she meant was plain. Marine sighed and shook her head, but said nothing more. The icy lump that had melted from Marine's middle when she learned there would be no further lessons from Elida returned twice as large. She had almost helped them cheat. Could she have given them a foretaste of the actual test for the shawl? Light, if the test meant being beaten the whole way. Light, how could she possibly pass? But whatever comprised the test, every woman who wore the shawl had undergone it and succeeded. She would as well. Somehow she would. She pushed Myrel and Suan to be harder on her. But though they sometimes made her weep, they refused to do what Elida had done. Even so, again and again she failed to complete all 100 weaves. That lump of ice grew a little larger every day. They did not see Elida again for 2 days, and then it was on their way to dinner at midday. The Red Sister stopped beside a tall stand lamp at the sight of them, speaking not a word as they curtsied. Still silent, she returned to watch as they passed her. Her face was a severe mask of serenity, but her eyes burned. Her gaze should have scorched the wool off their dresses. Moraine's heart sank. Clearly, Elida thought they had gone to the mistress of novices themselves, and she had paid a price in humiliation, according to Moraine. Moraine could think of several ways that the threat of a penance could be used to make Elida give way, and every one of them would have wrung the sister with humiliation. The only question was, how hard had Moraine wrung? Very hard, likely. She did speak of the novices and accept it as being hers. Oh, this was no small enmity that might fester over time. What was in Elida's eyes was full-blown animosity. They had acquired an enemy for life. Well, she told Suan as much, and her reasoning, the taller woman grunted sourly. Well, I never wanted to be her friend, did I? I tell you, once I gain the shawl, if she ever tries to harm me again, I will make her pay. Oh, Suan, Moraine laughed. Aes Sedai do not go about harming one another, but a friend would not be assuaged. 1 week to the day after Gitara made her foretelling, the weather warmed suddenly. The sun rose in a cloudless sky on what seemed like a cool spring day, and before sunset most of the snow had melted. All of it was gone around Dragon Mount, except on the very peak. The ground around the mountain had its own warmth, and snow always melted there first. The limit had been set. It was a boy born within those 10 days, and they sought. 2 days later, the number who met the criteria began to dwindle sharply, and near a week on, 5 days had passed without another name being added to their small books. They could only hope that no more were found, though. 9 days after the thaw, in the dim light before dawn, Moraine appeared on the gallery as Suan and Moraine were leaving for breakfast. She was wearing her shawl. Moraine de Modred, she said firmly, you are summoned to be tested for the shawl of an Aes Sedai. The light keep you whole and see you safe. And that, my friends, is all we have time for tonight. I know I normally go for about 2 hours, but I only do 2 chapters, so I guess suck it. We got a couple of options on who to raid. I think yeah, let's go raid Judge. Thank you all for coming along, and this will also be uploaded to YouTube's when I finally decide to do it later. Anyway, as I usually say, take care of yourselves and don't forget to love. I hope you all have a wonderful time zone, and thanks for coming and hanging out. And if you're watching the VOD, you are still loved, even if you weren't here. All right, take care of yourselves.